Mikael, the journalist, has just been found guilty of writing false accusations about a financial mogul Hans. We see Heinrich, the owner of a big family business called Vanger Industries, and we see him calling Morel, a detective, about a package he's gotten. Heinrich has been getting these dried plants on a photo frame for the last 40 years without knowing who the sender is. Meanwhile, after his trial for false accusations, Mikael believes his career is over, although Erica, Mikael's co-editor and secret lover, tells him otherwise. But despite this fact, even though he's not aware of it, Mikael is about to go on his greatest adventure yet. On our next scene, we see Armansky, Lisbeth's boss. Heinrich wanted to hire Mikael to investigate Harriet's disappearance and the anonymous gifts, and so he sent his right-hand man Frode, who hired Armansky to do a background check on Mikael. Frode asks if there's anything she left out on her report, but she tells him that the only thing left out is Mikael's relationship with his co-editor, who happens to be married. And after leaving Armansky's office, she starts investigating Hans for her own curiosity. Frode the next day calls Mikael, who was at a Christmas party with his daughter and colleagues. And during their conversation, Frode insists that Mikael come to Hedestad to meet Heinrich. He convinces him to come by telling him that Heinrich has a personal matter to discuss with him, and since Heinrich is a well-known and respected businessman, Mikael agrees. And in Hedestad, Heinrich offers Mikael information on Hans in exchange for his investigation into Harriet's disappearance. He continues to tell him information about Harriet and about how her father drowned the year before, and Heinrich had been taking care of her and her brother Martin, who now runs Vanger Industries. Heinrich tells him that that day was the family's board meeting and all of the Vanger family members had been gathered on the island. And on that day, there was also a parade where Harriet had spent some time before making her way back home. Once she got home, an accident happens over the bridge and everyone went over to help the victims, but when they came back home to have dinner, Harriet was no longer there. Because they never found a body, and since she was never seen escaping, Heinrich believes that she was murdered and the killer's trying to drive him crazy by sending him the flowers. He tells him that the investigation will be done in secret, while everyone will be told that Mikael is writing Heinrich's memoir. Mikael agrees to the deal because he really wants to take down Hans, who sued him for every penny he had. And since Mikael took on this job, now he has to stay on the island on this cottage that Heinrich gave him. Meanwhile, we learn that Lisbeth is a ward of the state since she's believed to be mentally incompetent. One day, while she was waiting for her guardian in a cafe with a present in her hand, he takes too long for their meeting and she goes to his house and finds him unconscious. She gets him to the hospital, and once there, the doctor tells her that he has neurological damage and his motor functions, meaning his movements, will also be severely affected. And now because her guardian, whom she loves so much, has to be replaced by another one, the state assigns her Yorick as her new guardian. And on her first encounter with Yorick in his office, he tells her that even though her last guardian let her control her finances, she can't do that any longer as she is still a ward of the state. And he tells her that from now, she only can take monthly allowances. Back at the island, Mikael gets all the old investigation files from Heinrich and the investigation begins. Mikael goes to speak with Morel. He shows him Harriet's diary, but Morel shrugs it off, saying he knows it in and out. Mikael points out the list of name initials and numbers at the end of it, and he tells him that they were local phone numbers. One of them was a local woman who was murdered, and the other numbers were not connected to Harriet in any way that Morel could find. Not having found anything, Mikael walks back to his cottage, and on his way he finds Liv, a friend of Martin's, and she offers to drive him home. They get to Martin's house and he talks to him in detail about Harriet, his sister, whom he misses very much. Meanwhile, at the train station, someone tries to mug Lisbeth and her laptop gets broken in the process. And as she now needs a new laptop to do her job, she goes to see her guardian for some money. And to sign off on her own money, he forces her to have relations with him. And after she complies, he writes her a check. But the allowance that he wrote her wasn't really enough, as now she needed food to eat. And she calls him again and asks for more money, and this time he tells her to come to his house. But when she gets there, he handcuffs her and knocks her out, and when she wakes up she was tied to his bed and he rapes her. What he didn't know was that she put a camera on her backpack before going in, and now she had everything he did to her on camera. She goes back to his house a second time to get money, but this time she was armed with a taser. After knocking him out and tying him to his own bed, she shows him the video of him raping her and tells him that he now has to cooperate with her, and if he doesn't, and this is how she put it, that video is going to spread on the internet like a virus. And her demands are that he put in a monthly report saying that she's doing better and that she's being more social, and to let her take whatever amount of money she wants without his authorization. She then proceeds to put a tattoo on his chest that says, "I am a rapist," so that he never gets with another girl. Back at the cottage, Cecilia, Harriet's cousin, comes to visit Mikael, and when he asks her what Harriet was like, she tells him that her sister Anita was much closer to her, but Anita has cut ties with the family and now lives in London. Mikael then goes to London and asks her a few questions. She tells him that Harriet was an unhappy teen. Mikael continues to study Harriet's diary and looks at other documents, but he doesn't get much information from it. He continues with the investigation, and when looking through the pictures of the parade that day, he sees Harriet's face expression change as if she saw someone that scared her. He also notices a woman right behind her that had a camera in her hand, and he finds this woman and takes a look at her pictures she took that day, and finds a picture of people Harriet saw at that moment when she was looking really scared, but he can't really identify which person she was looking at. As Mikael was knee-deep in the investigation, one day his daughter comes to visit him in the cottage. His daughter was on her way to go to Bible camp, and although he's not religious, he tells her that he supports whatever it is that she's doing. On her way out, she points out the numbers from Harriet's diary, telling him that they're Bible verses. When he checks the quotes, they all seem to talk about women being killed and slaughtered. In the middle of all this, Heinrich gets a stroke and is admitted into the hospital. As he was in the hospital, Mikael asks to access Vanger Industries' archives, and he also asks for an assistant. Frode tells him that he has a really great one, who was the same woman that did the background check on him. And so Mikael goes to meet Lisbeth, and although she was hesitant at first, she agrees to assist him. Once he gives her the list of the Bible verses, she immediately gets to work, and later she comes to the cottage to show him her findings. She finds the Bible verses imply the way each girl with the initials were killed, and they were killed in similar manners, and they were all Jewish. And from this information, they find that they're looking for a serial killer, and maybe Harriet was too, and that's how she got killed. And the next day, when they were trying to leave the cottage, they find a dead cat at their doorstep because someone was trying to scare them away. Mikael then goes to check out the house Harriet and her family used to live in, and as he left, someone tries to shoot at him. One of the bullets grazes him, and he runs back to the cottage, and Lisbeth stitches his wounds and installs cameras all around the cottage. That night, they end up sleeping together and their relationship changes. The next day, Martin helps Mikael convince Frode to access the Vanger Industry archives. Mikael tells Frode that they're getting close and that they need to access the archives, and Frode agrees even though he was reluctant at first. Mikael continues to look through the pictures from that day and notices yet another person with a camera. The person he noticed was Harold, Heinrich's brother, who's actually a Nazi supporter and nobody wants to speak to him, but Mikael goes to visit him and then finds some photos of the family from that day, and he takes them back to his cottage. Meanwhile, Lisbeth was at the Vanger office looking through their archives for the years the girls were killed. She finds out that Vanger Industries has either acquired some business the girls had worked at or been in each town doing business around the time the girls were killed. And this pointed at one person who was Martin's father, but some of the girls were killed after Martin's father had died, meaning the only person left who happens to be a suspect is Martin himself. And Lisbeth concludes that it's Martin after she looks through the archives and sees Martin sitting at one of Vanger Industries' meeting after his father had died, and she also notices a school badge on his jacket and connects it to the man in the parade photo whom Harriet saw before she looked scared. At the cottage, while Mikael goes through the pictures from Harold, he notices a school badge on Martin's jacket on one of the photos, and he draws the same conclusions as Lisbeth. Mikael then decides to go to Martin's house, but when he gets there, Martin was not home. He sneaks inside the house and notices a bunch of hunting rifles, and from this he realizes that it was Martin who was shooting at him a couple days ago as he was leaving Harriet's house. Mikael starts to feel really uneasy, and suddenly he hears Martin pulling up outside. He tries to escape through the back door but falls, and Martin sees him, and although they're both suspicious of each other's intentions, Martin invites Mikael in for a drink and he accepts. Lisbeth goes to the cottage to find Mikael, but she sees on his computer that he's figured out the same thing that she did, and she makes her way to Martin's house. And at Martin's house, Martin points a gun at Mikael and takes him to the basement and ties him up. The basement is where he keeps his victims, and he confesses to killing the last girl, and he tells him that their father abused both him and Harriet when they were young, and he also tells him that he didn't kill Harriet. And right before he kills Mikael, Lisbeth comes in and saves him, and Martin gets away and Lisbeth follows him. But before she had the chance to kill him, he gets into a car accident and burns alive. And since Martin confessed that he was actually a serial killer and that he killed a bunch of other people, he didn't really have a reason to lie about killing Harriet. And after some investigation, they find out that Anita was actually Harriet, and she was just pretending this whole time, and nobody really knew. Anita was the one that helped her get away from the island, as Harriet was relentlessly abused by her father, and after she killed him, her brother Martin also started to abuse her just like her father did. And even though he went to boarding school, he'd gotten back that day and she saw him at the parade, and she couldn't handle what he was going to do to her that night, and so she decided to escape. On our next scene, Mikael reunites Heinrich and Harriet, and then he gets his reward, which was the file on Hans. But unfortunately, the dirt that Heinrich had on Hans was not good enough, and Lisbeth had to hack into Hans's computer and find some illegal money laundered to overseas banks. She then goes to these overseas banks with a fake documentation and moves his money and makes it look like Hans was trying to move the money before the police find it. News breaks and he starts being investigated, and after a while he was found dead, presumably by the criminals he used to work with. And our movie ends with our favorite journalist Mikael being exonerated and continuing on with his normal life. And that is where our movie comes to an end. I hope this recap was longer. I really do, because I love this movie. I really encourage you guys to check it out. Also, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel. I love you guys so much, and I promise to see you on my next recap. Bye.